Hey guys, Mark here for Animus Empire. This week we're talking about resistance. Last week we talked about shamanism, a process without which you're never going to be able to change. And it's only by submitting ourselves to a process that is shamanic in some form are we ever going to be able to overcome something called resistance. And you can even argue that we have shamanism in the first place to overcome resistance, which is our inability to change. Any sort of stops, any sort of unconscious psychological stops we put in our mind, which encompasses, of course, defense mechanisms. Resistance is the explanation for why defense mechanisms exist. There's a bunch of defense mechanisms. We already talked about projection. I'm going to come back around to more, though. Yeah, but resistance, just what is keeping you from changing? And of course, we already mentioned it indirectly. Everything down here, everything that keeps us in our OCD, our sadness, being a victim, blaming other people, making excuses, temper tantrums, any sort of acting out, any sort of addiction is a way to keep yourself in your neuroses. May not be good for you, but it's what you're comfortable with. So you will, create these things to keep yourself in your neuroses. But the two most common ones that I see with guys are excuses, which involves, blaming other people. Oh, it's not me. This is similar to projection. It's not me. It's this society out here. Oh, culture is so terrible. Or, oh, this politician here. Of course, you're going to be resistant to understanding that the reason why you're focusing on the politician, or politics in general for most people, it's a way to distract yourself from your anxiety and, to project it out. Oh, it's not me. That's the problem. It's out there. Of course, you're going to be resistant to realizing that the reason why you're upset with X politician is because the real problem is with you and how you talk with your mom and dad. And then, so excuses is one, and also just denial. And the most common way that I've noticed guys experience denial is apathy. We're just like, oh, I don't care. Oh, that's not a big deal. Oh, this thing I have, it's not that much of a problem. And you kind of you turn in on yourself. There's a turning in aspect to apathy, and also with apathy there's tired, a lack of a general excitement with being alive. A great movie that encapsulates it, that discusses resistance. I forgot what I was talking about. That discusses resistance well is the movie Point Break, with Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, also called The Fast and the Furious, with Paul Walker and Vin Diesel. Now, what happens in both these movies? The police officer, whether it's Keanu Reeves or Paul Walker, they are the, quote, new idea, infiltrating this crime organization associated with whatever cool California subculture thing was going on at the time. In 1991, it was surfing, and in 2001, it was street racing. And the resistance that both Vin Diesel and the Swayster puts up, that is a great encapsulation. Those are all great demonstrations of resistance. But how does Paul Walker, how does Keanu Reeves eventually infiltrate the organization and end up changing it? They get the organization, the crime organization, they get them to overcome the resistance. Well, the first one, as you notice, and this is of course how you overcome resistance, is you notice. You notice there's this new idea out there. Paul Walker let it be known by having that street race with Vin Diesel in the beginning, where he's double clutching in a drag race, which, okay. But you notice when you're resisting, you're noticing the new idea. When I tell you that you could perhaps be projecting your anxiety onto a politician out there, you at least notice it and think, well, maybe I could be doing that. It's just like an entertainment of this thought. Patrick Swayze, the Swayster, entertains the existence of Johnny Utah, even though, of course, he doesn't like him at first. And what do? You create relations. How do you get it? Is you create relationships. This is how it happens. And of course, this is exemplified by Keanu Reeves falling in love with that waitress, and Paul Walker falling in love with that waitress. These are serious, guys. Don't make fun of these movies. And then the third thing is just immersion. You immerse yourself in this new world. You immerse yourself in the bone flute circle, the modern day version of that, group therapy. The best way to get at resistance is overcome resistance. Like Paul Walker immersed himself in the street racing world, Johnny Utah in the surfing world, and then the fourth and final step in overcoming resistance, it's not really a step. It just happens. The resistance, you don't really push through it, overcoming it, it just kind of happens. Usually experienced as some sort of religious experience. A divine insight of a deep truth, of a deep, dare I say, a beautiful truth that you kind of knew before. You kind of knew what the truth was, but you didn't really feel it to your marrow. That is the fourth step in resistance. You submit to yourself to noticing, building relationships, immersion in the neurosis. You know, a great example of immersion, just in a lot of stories, is the main character going to prison. Let's say Edmond Dantes, there you go, in The Count of Monte Cristo. He couldn't overcome his resistance to seeing that these people who were supposedly good for him, or the real resistance in that story is seeing how he's immature. He couldn't see it until he was in the prison. Of course, prison is a metaphor for something else. I mean, what percentage of us have been to prison, yet tons of movies, tons of stories have prison in them, and we all relate with it for some reason, because we know the feeling of being in a prison, so to speak. And you immerse yourself in the prison. You give yourself a no way out scenario. Both Paul Walker and Keanu Reeves were in a no way out scenario with these crime rings. And then they let him go. That's a great encapsulation of overcoming the resistance. They let Vin Diesel at the end of Fast and the Furious and Patrick Swayze go. They don't try to hold on to it. They create a relationship with it, and it's only through creating the relationship with it and really understanding it on both sides that they can just go their separate ways. But of course, changing, ultimately dispersing the neuroses of the crime ring in the first place. This is it, guys. And this is why we need a shamanic experience, because we're not going to overcome the resistance right away. We need something. We need to do steps 1 through 3, perhaps over and over again. And that's why we create this third world. We're creating a relationship with that third world, but ultimately what we're doing is creating a relationship with ourselves. This is resistance. This is how to overcome it. Keep working on this until you see that the ultimate resistance is the failure to see the genius in the Fast and the Furious and Point Break just because they happen to be the same movie.